The year is 2019. The setting is a conference room. Marriott Hotel, Des Moines, Iowa. Regional Agribusiness Awards Banquet. Frank Miller sits at a table in the back. He is 76 years old, retired for a decade. Still comes to these things, to see people, to feel connected to the life he once led. On the table is a printed report. Iowa Agricultural Efficiency Analysis 2018 Harvest. Frank puts on his reading glasses. He scans the columns. Bushels per acre, input costs per bushel, net profit per acre. The names are familiar. Families he'd known for 50 years. Customers he'd sold tractors to. Men he'd had coffee with at the co-op. Then he sees a name that makes him stop. Thorne Farms. He looks at the numbers next to the name. He takes his glasses off, wipes them with a napkin, puts them back on. The numbers are still there. They don't make sense. Not in a drought year. Not in the worst drought since 1988. Everyone's yields were down 30%, 40%. Some lost everything. But the Thorne Farms column was different. Corn yield, 284 bushels per acre. The county average was 170. Soybean yield, 81 bushels per acre. The state average was 52. Input costs were the lowest on the entire sheet, by a margin that felt like a typo. Net profit was astronomical, triple the next closest farm. Frank traces the line with his finger. He feels a cold knot in his stomach, something he couldn't quite name. It felt like the ghost of a past mistake, a mistake he made 15 years ago, a mistake born not of malice, but of certainty. He remembers a conversation in his office, a young farmer with an empty sleeve, a quiet man with a polite request, and a kind, firm refusal. Frank had been so sure he was doing the right thing, so sure he was protecting him. He looks at the name again. Thorne. The man he told it couldn't be done. The man who, according to this piece of paper, had done it better than anyone else in the state of Iowa. This channel tells the stories of people who were told no. People who looked at an obstacle and refused to see a wall. They saw a challenge. They saw a starting point. We believe these stories need to be told, not for motivation, but for validation. To remind you that the only person who gets to define your limits is you. If you believe that too, subscribe to this channel. Because the story of Jacob Thorne is one you need to hear. What happened after that refusal changed everything. Let's go back. March of 2004. The air still had the bite of winter. The ground was soft, waiting for the thaw. Frank Miller's office at the John Deere dealership smelled of coffee and clean grease. Frank was a good man. Everyone in the county would tell you that. Coached Little League for 20 years. Served on the church board. Helped organize the annual pancake breakfast. He was fair. He was honest. And he cared about his customers. He saw them as neighbors, not as accounts. Jacob Thorne sat across from him. He was 32 years old. His face was weathered from the sun and wind. His hands were calloused. One hand. His left sleeve was pinned neatly at the elbow. A farming accident 10 years prior. A power takeoff shaft. It had happened in a fraction of a second. It had redefined his entire life. But he had kept farming. He and his father worked the family's 800 acres. They made it work. But his father was getting older, and the equipment was getting older too. It was time to upgrade. Jacob had the financials. He had the down payment. He wanted to buy the new 9760 STS combine. A beautiful machine, green and yellow promise. It had the new auto-track steering system, GPS guided. Hands-free operation in the field. It was the future. And it cost $350,000. Frank looked at the paperwork. He looked at Jacob. He leaned back in his chair. The chair sighed under his weight. "Jacob," he said, "I've known your family my whole life. I sold your dad his first tractor, a Model B, back in '58. Jacob nodded. He knew the stories. Frank continued. "This is a fine machine, the best we've ever made. That new guidance system, it's a game changer, but it's complex. You're monitoring yield maps, you're adjusting settings on the fly. There are 2 control sticks, multiple screens. It takes 2 good hands to run it right, to run it safely." The room was quiet, only the hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. Jacob didn't say anything. He just waited. Frank leaned forward. His voice was soft. It was kind, full of genuine concern. "Son, I can't sell you this combine. I can't in good conscience do it. Farming is dangerous enough as it is. You know that better than anyone. I am not going to be the man who sells you a piece of equipment that puts you at risk. I won't have that on my conscience." It wasn't a negotiation. It was a verdict, delivered with the gentle authority of a man who believed he was preventing a tragedy. Jacob felt something colder than the March wind. It wasn't anger. It wasn't humiliation. It was the quiet devastation of being carefully, kindly, and completely underestimated. This man didn't hate him. He didn't want him to fail. He wanted to protect him, and that was so much worse. You can fight cruelty. You can argue with greed. But how do you fight a man's genuine concern for your well-being? How do you fight someone who is certain they know your limits better than you do? Jacob stood up. He folded his financial papers neatly. He put them in his coat pocket. "I understand," he said. His voice was even. Frank stood up too. He put a hand on Jacob's shoulder, his good shoulder. "We can look at some other models, older ones, simpler systems. We'll find something that works for you." Jacob looked at the man's kind face. He saw the certainty in his eyes. "No," he said. "I don't think you will." And he walked out of the office, out of the dealership, into the cold March air. He had the money. He had the credit. He had the need. But he had been refused. Not because he was a risk to the bank, but because he was a risk to one man's conscience. The drive home was 10 miles of silence. The truck radio was off. The fields on either side were bare and brown. A landscape of potential, a landscape of work to be done. He pulled into the long gravel driveway of his family's farm. The house was 100 years old, white paint peeling in spots, a porch swing moving slightly in the breeze. His daughter Sarah was on the steps. She was 19, home from her first year of college, studying mechanical engineering. She had her father's quiet eyes, but her grandfather's hands, hands that could fix anything. She watched him get out of the truck. She saw it in his walk, the way his shoulders were set. She didn't have to ask. He said no, she stated. It wasn't a question. Jacob stopped at the bottom of the steps. He looked at his daughter. He said, "Frank thinks he's protecting me. He won't sell me the 9760. He says it takes 2 hands." Sarah was quiet for a long time. She looked out over the fields, the 800 acres that had been in their family for 4 generations. The land didn't know about pinned sleeves or kind refusals. The land just knew the seasons. It knew the work. Jacob's father came out onto the porch. He was 70, but he still moved with purpose. He'd heard the conversation. He looked at his son. He looked at his granddaughter. He put a hand on the porch railing. "Years ago," he said, "the bank tried to take this place. The drought of '88. They took our credit. They took our confidence. They took everything they could. But they couldn't take the dirt. He looked at Jacob. The dirt is enough. He looked at Sarah. The dirt doesn't care how many hands you have. It only cares about the work. That was it. No grand speech. No rally against the injustice. Just a simple, fundamental truth. The dirt doesn't care. Sarah looked at her father. Her eyes had a fire in them, a fire of gears turning, of problems being solved. Then we don't need his combine, she said. We need the truck and the trailer, and the checkbook. Jacob looked at her. For what? She smiled, a small, determined smile. For parts, she said. If they won't sell us the solution, we'll go buy the pieces, and we'll build a better one. The next day, Sarah didn't drive the old pickup to the John Deere dealership. She drove it east, towards the city. She had a list, and a budget. The $75,000 down payment they'd saved for the new combine. She didn't go to a farm supply store. Her first stop was an industrial salvage yard, a graveyard of automated factories. Robotic arms lay in piles, servo motors and hydraulic actuators, control panels from assembly lines that no longer existed. She spent 2 days walking through that metal cemetery, testing circuits, checking specs on motors, haggling with the yard owner. She loaded the trailer with components from a defunct auto manufacturing plant. Robotics designed for precision, for speed, for reliability. Her next stop was a small electronics surplus store. She bought processors, wiring harnesses, joysticks from an old arcade machine, high-resolution micro cameras, the kind used for inspecting silicon wafers. She came home with a trailer full of what looked like junk. Her father looked at the pile of mismatched metal and wires. He didn't see junk. He saw his daughter's mind at work. That winter was the longest and shortest of their lives. The big machine shed became a laboratory, a single light bulb burning late into every night. They pulled their old combine in, a John Deere 9500, 15 years old, solid, reliable, but dumb as a box of rocks. Sarah was going to give it a brain. She started by taking things apart. She disconnected the steering column. She removed the complex web of hydraulic levers. She stripped the cab down to bare metal. Her father watched. He cleaned parts. He ran for tools. He made coffee. He learned the language of his daughter's world. Servos, actuators, code. She spent a month designing the control system, not for 2 hands, but for 1. She mounted a military-grade joystick to the right of the operator's seat. It controlled everything. Forward and back for speed, left and right for steering, a thumb button to raise and lower the header, a trigger to engage the separator. She used the arcade buttons for secondary functions, each one coded, each one placed in a perfect arc for Jacob's thumb and fingers. He could run every essential function without ever letting go of the stick, but that was only half of it. The other half was vision. She mounted the micro cameras on the combine's header. She wrote code, thousands of lines of code, teaching a computer to see the difference between cut and uncut stalks of corn, teaching it to follow a perfectly straight line. It wasn't GPS. It was smarter. It was adaptive. It didn't rely on a signal from a satellite. It relied on what was right in front of it, the work itself. By April, it was done. The inside of the old 9500 looked like a fighter jet cockpit, a single joystick, a touchscreen monitor, and a simple, clean layout. Jacob climbed in. He sat in the seat. He put his hand on the joystick. It felt like it was made for him, because it was. He started the engine. The old machine rumbled to life, but now it had a new heart, a new mind, a mind built by his daughter, in a shed, in the middle of an Iowa winter, because someone, somewhere, had told them no. The first day of harvest, the neighbors noticed. You can't hide a combine in a cornfield. They saw the old 9500 moving through the rows, but it was moving differently, faster, more precisely. It never slowed for the turns. The header stayed perfectly level. A few of them drove over to the edge of the field. They watched from their trucks. Old Man Hemlock was one of them. Farmed the section to the north. He watched for an hour. Then he drove to the co-op for coffee. He told the men at the corner table, "That Thorne boy's gonna kill himself in that thing. Got it rigged up with all sorts of junk. It ain't safe." Another farmer, a younger man, chimed in. Frank Miller was right not to sell him that new machine. A man with one arm has no business running a combine that big. It was the consensus, a quiet, grim agreement. Jacob Thorne was a nice guy, a hard worker, but he was pushing his luck. The contraption in his field was an accident waiting to happen. It was a tragedy foretold over morning coffee, but not everyone felt that way. One afternoon, a truck pulled up next to the field where Jacob was working. It was Bill Satterly. Farmed the land to the west. He was in his late 60s. He got out of his truck holding a thermos. He waited for Jacob to finish a pass. Jacob stopped the combine and climbed down. Bill handed him a cup of coffee. "They're talking about you down at the co-op," Bill said. Jacob sipped the coffee. "I imagine they are." Bill looked at the strange modified combine. He looked at the perfectly straight rows of stubble behind it. "They say it ain't safe." Jacob didn't say anything. Bill kicked at a clump of dirt. "My dad lost 2 fingers in a corn picker back in '62. The doctor told him he should sell the farm, said he couldn't work anymore." Bill looked Jacob in the eye. "My dad farmed for another 30 years. He used to say the people who tell you what you can't do are the ones who are afraid to try." He handed Jacob the whole thermos. "Keep it," he said. "You're doing good work, son." And he got back in his truck and drove away. It was a small thing, a cup of coffee, a few words of encouragement. But in a world of whispers and doubt, it was everything. It was a reminder that for every person who sees a limitation, there is someone else who sees a solution. A reminder that community isn't always the voice of caution. Sometimes, it's the quiet nod of respect from a man who understands the work. Have you ever been told you couldn't do something? Not by an enemy, not by a rival, but by someone who genuinely thought they were helping you? Someone who wanted to protect you from failure or from harm. They wrapped their own fear around you and called it concern. They defined your horizon and called it safety. It's the kindest, most damaging refusal there is, because it makes you doubt yourself. If you've ever felt that, if you've ever had to push back against someone's good intentions for you, tell us about it in the comments below. Your story matters. It's a story of breaking through a different kind of wall. Because what Jacob and Sarah did next wasn't just about one harvest. It was about the next 15 years. And this is where the story gets bigger than just one farm. That first year, their harvest was 10% more efficient. The machine could run faster. The turns were quicker. There was less grain loss at the header. It added up. By 2005, they had paid off their operating loan, in cash. And they had money in the bank, a lot of it. In 2006, the Peterson farm next door went up for sale. Old man Peterson was retiring. His kids didn't want the land. Jacob and Sarah went to the auction. They bought all 320 acres, cash. Frank Miller, at the dealership, he heard about it. He thought it was a fluke, a good year. He was happy for them. But he was still certain he'd made the right call. By 2008, Sarah had refined the system, version 2.0. Better cameras, faster processors. The code was cleaner. She added yield monitoring sensors. It could now adjust its own speed based on crop density, maximizing efficiency foot by foot. Their fuel costs dropped by 20%. Their yields went up another 10%. That year, they bought the old Miller place, no relation to Frank. Another 400 acres, cash. Now they were farming 1,520 acres, with one combine and 2 people. The talk at the co-op started to change. The whispers of doubt were replaced by murmurs of grudging respect. No one called Jacob's machine a death trap anymore. They called it the Thorn Combine. Frank Miller would see Jacob at the parts counter. Jacob was always polite, quiet. He never mentioned the refusal. He never gloated. He just bought his filters and his oil and left. Frank would watch him go. He saw the confidence in his walk. He saw the dirt under his fingernails. And he felt that strange, unsettling feeling again. The feeling of a world that was working in a way he hadn't predicted. 2012. Sarah graduated with her master's in robotics. She had job offers from Boston Dynamics, from Tesla, from John Deere's own research and development division. She turned them all down. She came home. She and her father started a small business in the machine shed, Thorn Adaptive Systems. They started retrofitting older combines for other farmers, small family farmers, the ones who couldn't afford a new $500,000 machine. They gave them the same technology, the same efficiency, for a fraction of the cost. By 2015, they were farming 2,500 acres of their own, and they had upgraded over 50 combines for farmers across 3 states. Every piece of land they bought, every expansion, every new building, cash, no debt, no dependency, no asking for permission. They had built their own system on their own terms. Frank Miller retired that year. They threw him a big party at the dealership. Everyone came. He got a gold watch. They made speeches about his integrity, his service to the community, his fairness. And it was all true. Frank was a good man, a decent man. But as he stood there, smiling and shaking hands, he couldn't stop thinking about Jacob Thorn, the one sale he had refused to make. He drove past the Thorn farm on his way home. He saw the lights on in the big new machine shed. He saw the rows of grain bins, taller than any others in the county. And he knew, deep down, that his one act of kind, certain, protective refusal had cost him the biggest deal of his life. He just didn't understand how big. Not yet. Then came the drought of 2018. It started in June. The rain just stopped. The sky turned a hazy, metallic gray. The corn leaves curled up. The soybeans withered. It was a slow-motion disaster. By harvest time, the county was a wasteland. Yields were catastrophic. Farmers were talking to bankers in hushed, desperate tones. But the news from the Thorn farm was different. The whispers were strange, impossible. They said the Thorn corn was still green. They said his yields were barely affected. Frank Miller heard the talk. He dismissed it as rumor, exaggeration, until he saw the state efficiency report at that banquet in 2019. The numbers on the page, the undeniable, printed proof. The next day, he got in his truck. He drove out to Jacob Thorne's farm. He didn't know why. He just had to see. He pulled into the driveway. Jacob was in the yard, working on a piece of equipment. He saw Frank's truck. He wiped his hand on his jeans and walked over. He looked older. His hair was gray at the temples, but his eyes were the same. Quiet, calm. Frank got out of the truck. He felt awkward, an intruder. "I saw the state report," Frank said. "I don't understand. How did you beat the drought?" Jacob leaned against the truck's fender. He looked out at his fields. He was quiet for a moment. Then he spoke. "It was the combine," he said. "Sarah's system. It does more than just steer. She put moisture sensors on it, soil probes. It creates a map, not just of yield, but of hydration. A map of every square foot of our land." He pointed to a strange-looking rig parked by the barn. "That's our applicator. We built it last winter. It puts water and nutrients only where the map says it's needed. Not on the whole field, right at the root. No waste." Our water usage was down 70%. While everyone else was running out, we had just enough. Frank was speechless. It wasn't just a steering system. It was a complete resource management platform. Born in a shed, built from scrap, perfected over a decade. He looked at Jacob, at the man he had tried to protect, the man he had judged as incapable. "I was wrong," Frank said. The words felt small, inadequate. "I was so sure I was doing the right thing. I thought I was helping you." Jacob looked at Frank. There was no anger in his eyes, no triumph, only a deep, quiet sadness. "I know you did, Frank. That's what made it so hard. Proving someone wrong who thinks they're being cruel is a fight. It gives you energy. But proving someone wrong who thinks they're being kind..." He paused. "That's the loneliest work there is. Because you're not just fighting their opinion. You're fighting their good intentions. You were so certain about what I couldn't do, you never stopped to ask what we could build." Frank Miller stood there in the gravel driveway. The wind blew dust across his polished shoes. He finally understood. The knot in his stomach wasn't the ghost of a lost sale. It was the ghost of his own limited imagination. He had looked at a man with one arm and seen a liability. Sarah had looked at her father and seen a design challenge. And that difference, that one small difference in perspective, had changed the future of farming in a way Frank Miller could never have imagined. The story doesn't end there. It never does. Thorne Adaptive Systems is now a multi-million-dollar company. They operate out of a new facility in town. They employ 40 people. They don't build combines. They build brains. They create custom adaptive controls for any piece of farm equipment. For farmers with disabilities, for aging farmers, for anyone who needs a different way to do the work. Sarah Thorne is a leader in her field. She holds a dozen patents. She gives talks at engineering conferences. But she still lives on the farm. She still has dirt under her fingernails. In 2020, she and Jacob established the Thorne Foundation. It provides full scholarships for rural students with disabilities to pursue degrees in engineering, robotics, and agriculture. To date, it has sent 28 young men and women to college. Kids who were told their whole lives what they couldn't do. Kids who are now designing the future. Jacob still farms. He's farming over 5,000 acres now. He has a crew, new equipment, but he still keeps the old 9500, the one they modified that first winter. It sits in the first bay of the main shed, cleaned and maintained, a museum piece, a reminder. And on the wall of the farm office, mounted on a polished piece of oak, is the first joystick Sarah ever built, the one made from arcade parts. Its red plastic is worn smooth from years of use. The wires are neatly tied behind it. Sometimes, a young scholarship recipient will visit the farm. Jacob will show them the office. He'll point to the joystick on the wall. He'll tell them the story. He watches them as they reach out and touch it. They run a finger over the smooth plastic. They see the worn button. And in their eyes, he sees the same spark he saw in his daughter's eyes all those years ago. The spark that refuses to accept a world designed for someone else. The spark that says, if the tool doesn't fit my hand, I will not change my hand. I will build a better tool. Right now, somewhere in the world, someone is being told no. Someone is being told they can't. They're being told it's too risky, too difficult, too complicated. And the person telling them this might be a boss, a banker, a teacher, or even someone who loves them, someone who is just trying to protect them. This story is a reminder that kindness without imagination is a cage. Certainty is a prison. The most powerful thing you can do is to believe in someone's potential more than you believe in their limitations. To ask not, can you do this, but how can we build this together? The dirt doesn't care how many hands you have. It only cares about the work. And the work is always possible. If this story meant something to you, subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like this that need to be told. Leave a comment and tell us about a time you or someone you know built a better tool. And share this video with someone who needs to be reminded of what's possible. Someone who is facing a kind refusal. Someone who just needs to hear that the dirt is enough and the work is waiting.